Wolfgang Iser developed his reader response theory in a lecture in 1970, The Affective Structure of the Text, and later in his important works, The Implied Reader, published in 1972, and The Act of Reading, published in 1976. His main concern was to explain how meaning in literature is created, not just by the text itself, but by the interaction between the text and the reader. Understanding a literary work involves more than just reading the printed words. We must also consider what happens when a reader engages with the text. He divides a literary work into two poles. The first is the artistic pole, the text created by the author. The second is the aesthetic pole, the realization of the text that happens in the reader's mind. A literary work exists only in the meeting point between these two poles. It is neither the text nor the reader's interpretation, but something alive that emerges when the two come together. Reading is therefore not passive, it is an active and creative process. A key part of this creativity is what Iser calls the gaps in the text. A perfect, fully explained story would leave no room for the reader's imagination. But a good literary work deliberately leaves certain things unsaid. These gaps allow the reader to actively work out meaning. However, the text itself guides the reader. It uses various strategies to shape the reader's imagination and prevent meaning from being completely random. To explain this, Iser uses the idea of Roman Ingarden's intentional sentence correlatives. This means that a work of literature does not refer to an objective reality outside itself. Instead, the sentences create a unique fictional world. But the connections between these sentences are not fixed. They are built by the reader. Every sentence points to something beyond itself and creates expectations in the reader's mind. In great literature, these expectations are not fully satisfied. Instead, they are altered and even frustrated as we read. In contrast, scientific or philosophical writing aims to confirm expectations, while good literature encourages the reader to think and imagine. Iser calls the text that emerges in the reader's mind the virtual dimension, the place where text and imagination meet. Iser identifies two important aspects of reading. First, reading is a temporal process. We cannot absorb a whole text at once. Reading unfolds over time, and the fictional world does not appear in a simple linear way. Words and scenes sink into memory, and when we read later parts of a text, earlier parts reappear in different ways. Readers constantly reinterpret what they have read by connecting the past, present, and future of their reading experience. Each reading of the same text is different. When we read again, we already know the ending and connect elements differently. So the meaning of a text is shaped by anticipation and retrospection. Second, reading involves a search for consistency. When confronted with gaps, contradictions, or changes in a text, readers naturally try to make sense of them. We project coherence onto the text, bringing our own experiences, memories, and perspectives into play. This makes the reading experience personal. We discover not only what the text means, but also something about ourselves. Reading is therefore both a creative and a self-reflective process. This need for consistency also creates a tension. On the one hand, readers want to build a coherent interpretation. On the other hand, texts resist complete closure. Literature contains multiple possibilities of meaning, and readers' interpretations are only one way of realizing those possibilities. Iser calls this tension between the illusion forming, making meaning coherent, and the illusion breaking, recognizing gaps and contradictions central to the aesthetic experience of reading. This dynamic is what makes literature feel alive. It reflects the way we experience life itself with shifting perspectives and unfinished meanings. Drawing on John Dewey's ideas in Art as Experience, published in 1958, Iser argues that reading is an act of recreation. Just as the author organizes the text, the reader must reconstruct it through their own activity. This process is not smooth or fixed. It involves anticipation, retrospection, decision making, rethinking, acceptance, and rejection. Two factors guide this recreation: familiarity and defamiliarization. Familiar literary patterns, themes, and social contexts give readers a framework, but good literature also defamiliarizes. It challenges what we think we know. This interplay creates tension which is essential to reading. The reader constantly moves between involvement in the fictional world and observing it from the outside. Iser explains that this interplay makes reading a living event. Readers are drawn into the text, but they also bring their own background to it. As a result, reading allows them to experience something new while reflecting their own identity. In this sense, literature becomes a mirror that reflects both the world of the text and the world of the reader. Some critics say reading is identification, taking on the perspective of a character or the author. Iser draws on Poulet's phenomenology of reading to explain this. Poulet suggested that reading involves thinking the author's thoughts. The reader temporarily sets aside their own personality and enters the author's world. Iser modifies this by saying reading involves a split in the reader's self. We take on the author's perspective, but our own background remains as a virtual force. This creates a dialectical process. Our subjectivity interacts with the author's subjectivity. Reading becomes an ongoing negotiation between these two selves. To describe this process, Iser introduces the concept of the implied reader. This is not a real reader, nor an idealized one, but a structural role the text creates. The implied reader is the network of expectations and interpretive possibilities built into the text. The reader fulfills this role actively. The implied reader works in two ways: as a textual structure and as a structured act. As a structure, the text provides perspectives, narrator, characters, plot that guide interpretation. As a structured act, the reader actively brings these perspectives together to create meaning. Every reading is a selective actualization of the implied reader, shaped by the reader's own background and experience. A central idea of Iser is negativity. All texts have blanks, missing details, and negations, contradictions, or gaps. These gaps force the reader to actively create meaning. Negativity is a foundation of literary communication. It allows words to have multiple layers of meaning and creates a tension that drives the reading process. Negativity has three effects. It allows readers to connect different parts of the text. It disrupts familiar knowledge and makes readers search for deeper meaning, and it breaks the reality of the reader's world to open new perspectives. Negativity allows literature to transcend the ordinary and expand the reader's experience. Meaning in literature is not fixed. It is a dynamic process that happens in time between text and reader. The text provides structures that guide interpretation, but the reader's response is shaped by their own knowledge and perspective. Iser calls this interaction meaning production. It is not arbitrary because it happens within limits set by the text. Different readers may produce different meanings, but all interpretations remain connected to the textual structure. Iser criticizes older models of interpretation that aims to uncover a single fixed meaning.